All right, everyone, welcome back to part two of this two-part series we have with Kevin Reardon. Today, we go into a little bit more of his mindset. I know we touched on it a little bit in the first episode, just his big single location practice, but it's really cool to hear more of his mindset in this episode and what kind of fuels him to do what he does.
Yeah, I think there's some irony in the opportunity that Kevin ended up going with, right? Because he, was someone that consumed a lot of shared practices resources, and ultimately what he went into was a smaller FFS practice. It's 4 ops. It's not exactly the kind of thing that we're professing is like, this is the sort of opportunity you need to find out of school. But he has taken a principled approach and has used all the things that he learned as a dental student to benefit him in this model that's very different from the kind that we really, tout. But he's doing it in a very authentic way. And he kind of gets into the mindset around that and how he measures himself. And, he talks about, what's cool and what's not. And, I'll let him speak for himself with all that. But I just think it's really cool to see someone that's not necessarily following the formula, but how he's going about it and who he's being throughout it is very much in line with the things we talk about. So I really love that. And he's totally owning all of it. So it's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, he goes about things his own way. And I think it's very cool and unique that he knows himself well enough to do that. So we won't give away too much of it. Let's go ahead and get into the interview.
And this episode is picking up after the 40 minutes from part 1. I think that, you do have this sort of acquisition based idea, and you have the sort of larger group practice model in mind, down the road, but it's like you're sort of sequencing your career in steps. And I think that's pretty cool because you're not necessarily saying I'm looking for exactly what I want right out the gate. I'm finding a sequential stepwise fashion of getting there.
Right.
And you have a plan of growing that out, and it doesn't necessarily grow from the same seed. Right. Like you have this practice that has, and in your opinion, and I absolutely, I can see where you're coming from, enough low hanging fruit to sustain you for a few years and treating this, largely watch population. And that's going to provide you that buffer to where, eventually you'll be able to leapfrog into another acquisition, a merger, de novo practice, whatever that case may be, in the coming years. And I think that's smart. And I like how you're kind of looking at sequentially.
Yeah, I try to. I think, I had my vision and it is what it is now, and I am going there sequentially. But at the end of the day, having a vision, I don't get to reap. It's not cool to just have a vision. If you just have a vision, like I don't, I feel like I am flirting on this line of like, oh, this guy thinks he's hot shit, because has this idea. Like I feel so. Like I don't feel like I'm crushing it. I don't feel like I have this sense of like accomplishment because I know that I have this big vision that I'm not even remotely close to. So I feel like having the vision just like gives me this serving of humble pie every day. And at the end of the day, I'm never going to ever get there if I can't focus on one practice. If all I ever have is this one 4-hour practice, I'll be just fine and I'll be happy. I will find a way to be happy. I'm sure I will. I can be happy now. It's just the type of person that I am. But I know that I haven't also, tapped into what I'm capable of and what this practice is capable of.
Right.
And so, yeah, it's cool. It's really cool to talk about, multi-specialty practice, fee for service, doing all these things. That sounds cool, but I really haven't done it yet. So, you don't get there. I can't get there until I start making this practice efficient and making sure that the staff is trained and making sure that we have systems for literally everything, because there was pretty much just the doctor's wife was the office manager and she just had in her brain just like,
just shooting
like
from the hip.
bailing. Exactly. So, I guess I don't know if I could kind of get into that, but like some things that like I came into this practice and again, to kind of tie it into maybe something valuable to listeners, pre-owners out there,
please.
You can read your books, but at the end of the day, like if you just get dropped, I'm not a military background, but if you just get dropped in the middle of a war zone, it didn't matter like what your objective might have been. You can't just be like, well, we were supposed to cross this bridge. Well, you're getting shot at. Like if the bridge doesn't exist, it got blown up. So that's kind of how I felt. Like I got dropped in this practice, and I was like, oh, I'm going to check these KPIs, and I'm going to just simply will add a hygienist, and I will simply just do all this extra production. Why doesn't the doctor see that his ground to 3 service thing is wrong? And then you come in, it's like, we have paper charts. We have
you're in the crossfire.
We have a X-ray system where everyone's name is messed up. Like it physically could not bridge to any patient management software because the naming system was completely wrong. Like all these other problems, that's like, you can prepare and listen to this podcast, but at the end of the day, you just have to accept the fact that I'm never going to be able to control 90% of these initial problems. Unless you happen to find that practice that's just running like a perfectly well-oiled machine, and you have some financing that can buy you that $1 million practice that's already churning and burning. But if you're buying right out of school, especially, you're probably going to be buying a practice that has some room for growth that probably isn't that systematized. So just being ready for like adaptability is the number one thing. And and doing the pre-mortem, I kind of talked about this earlier, but like the pre-mortem of like, okay, what could go wrong? I had a lot of time. It took me a long time to get my license. So I had a lot of time just waiting to kind of practice. Like, okay, well, what if the staff gives pushback about diagnosing perio? What if the assistants don't like me? What if the patients are doing that? Just kind of thinking about the worst thing that could happen and what will you do if it does? And then that kind of just trains your mind to think, when it does happen, you're ready to adapt to it because you're already in the mindset of like, okay, creatively thinking, and okay, this didn't go wrong exactly like I thought, but it's sort of, in the same vein of I've already anticipated this a little bit, and how can we go from there? And that's pretty much like, there's no, people want to look for the secret sauce of like, oh, I'm a new owner. What do I do? What do I do? Like, you literally just have to go in. It's like you're doing a comprehensive exam on someone. You don't know what you're going to see when you open the mouth and look through the x-rays. And until you get into the practice, get into the weeds and see what the practice needs, you got to do your own diagnosing. And some people are better at diagnosing more dentistry than others. And that's what you just got to be, you got to analyze your practice as you're stepping into it and figure out what needs to be done and what's the most efficient use of your time.
Yeah, no, I think you make a lot of great points. I mean, you're someone that, was very diligent about their study of the business of dentistry. Like, you knew about all these KPIs and you knew about how to analyze practices. And I love that you're kind of giving a testament to, yes, those things can help. Like it's something to have in your armamentarium for sure. But when you get into an opportunity, I mean, bullets are flying, to continue your metaphor. And, you're going to be scrambling. And at the end of the day, it's people that are able to, think and work on their feet and, stay on top of things and just react, that I think are really going to define how those, first few months really go. And I agree with you. Excuse me. I don't think there's, like a certain amount of podcasts or episodes that you can listen to that's going to like really prepare you for that. I think it's an ongoing process. So I'm kind of curious about have there been any resources for you outside of just being in your practice that have sort of helped guide you along this process of trying to just weather the storm?
That's tough to say because, I mean, of course there are so many, like, I feel like my brain is just a conglomeration of all of those awesome resources that everyone kind of knows, like this podcast, and I'll preach to the choir about the first couple episodes or the first couple seasons specifically, for finding a practice. And then, one thing I feel like every D4, especially you guys will probably relate to this. If you are kind of a podcaster, you get to a point where like, you feel like you're not, each episode you're not learning too much more. You feel like you kind of have a good idea. And for me, like when you get to that point, just kind of trust your gut that you've kind of capped out at what you can retain on that, and just go straight for leadership and mindset. For me, like what became my Bible is oh my God, how it became my Bible. I don't even know the name of it.
It must have been really good.
The obstacle is the way. Sorry. I just was,
there you go. Right on.
Yeah. Great. And that just, I mean, that to me, that's just kind of how I try to live. And I mean, that's one that I guess I don't hear talked about a ton, and that I throw that out. But other than that, just the things that you hear about, I mean, if you're listening to these podcasts, you've already heard a million people tell you their book suggestions and their podcast suggestions. Go through those and then just focus on that. One resources that I made for myself was, let me see if I have, I just kind of made like a chart of how I was going to decide what, let me see if I have it. Yeah. So I made a chart of like, okay, well, how am I going to prioritize what's the most important thing to add to this practice? And I just ordered it from top to bottom. Mm-hmm. Number one is what's going to make my life significantly easier. So anything that there was a problem with that was going to make my life significantly easier, even if it wasn't going to make me more money, or if it was going to lose me money, I was going to do that. So paper scheduling, like you can't track hygiene reappointment rate if your scheduling is done on paper, and scheduling on paper is a huge pain for me. So it's like, yeah, I'm buying a new patient management system. We're going through that conversion. I will take time off to train on it. I don't really care because we're going there. Then the next was what's going to make my employees' life significantly easier, which to me was really important because I want to gain their trust, and having that initial, if like one of the first things I'm saying to them is like, what do you not like? Like what can be better for you? And my hygienist immediately had this list of like I don't have, you're wanting me to do these scaling. That's great. But like, I don't have the instruments for it. So I was like, yeah, boom. What do you want? Like, let's go on a shopping spree and let's do it. And I think making your employees' lives easier buys you a lot of equity because it's just a show of trust. Like I trust them a lot. And then, so what makes my life significantly easier? What makes my employees' life significantly easier? How can what will allow us to significantly improve patient care, whether that's more efficiency with how the appointments go. That's mostly what it's been, buying different materials, stuff like that, training assistants to get that done. And then after that, then I started looking like, okay, well, how can I make more money? How can the practice make more money? Like grow the top line. And then the last thing on the priority list is like, what will allow us to save money? So like the last thing I'm worried about is like, how can I shave like 30 cents off of my bibs, my patient napkins? Like to me, that's like, that's so not important because I want to make my life easier. I want to make my employees' lives easier. Like that's so far down the food chain of how I want to organize what to do. And like, you have a million problems as a practice owner. So making sense of like, okay, well, which one should we focus on? Can be pretty impossible. And the last thing you need to be doing as you're an owner is like, well, Safco has these napkins for this price, but they have these napkins for this price. It's just like focus on what actually matters, which is everything else I kind of talked about. And again, make that your own. I mean, some people are like, oh, I just want to grow. So your most important thing is what can you do to grow the top line? And if that's, kind of figure out your own hierarchy of how you rank and organize your problems and solutions, and you just feed the problems into that.
Yeah. And I think that, growing your top line and focusing on the pain points that you talked about are not necessarily mutually exclusive. Like I feel that if you really tend to those things that are, making your life harder and you take care of them and you take care of your employees as well, I'd be pretty shocked if there weren't a production bump to go along with that. I mean, people are happier, more motivated at work. I mean, I can just say studies show that works. I'm not going to cite any studies. I think it's pretty self-evident.
No. And it's just, I mean, it just makes sense. Okay. If you're taking an hour and 30 minutes to prep a crown and you can figure out a system, there was the assistants at the practice were not trained. Like they didn't know how to suction. They didn't know how to take x-rays. Oh, okay. So for me, like crown preps so much, I was wasting so much time, like rinsing and just like getting suction properly oriented. So it's like, okay, I'm buying an Isovax and that alone has been just like, or sorry, Mr. Thirsty. I'll give a plug for them. But to me, it was like, okay, I don't really care what that costs. I'll probably end up buying the Isovac because I think it's a superior product. And that just cut out so much time. And it's like, okay, I'm spending money, but I just cut out 20 minutes off of my time. So now how much more profitable are you per hour? If you look at your production per hour now, you just through the roof compared to what it was, because if you can cut out 20 minutes if you can cut out 5 minutes, 10 minutes on a procedure, I mean, that's going to be the best way to grow your profitability. And for me, it was almost like hard to do that, especially when money was really tight, when insurances,
Mm-hmm.
even being out of network. Another little just quick tidbit is even if you're out of network, you have to register with these insurances, which is such a pain in the ass because they just like pretend that they didn't get emails and faxes. Like I could fax, email, mail something, and then they'll say, oh, we didn't get it. And then I'll just becoming, yeah. So when we're waiting for insurances to recognize me, the has kind of hurt the cash flow a little bit. So it was hard for me to like want to spend that money initially on those little things. But once I kind of started spending money on things that were going to make my life easier, like I said, I just kind of got addicted to it because like I don't really care what is $100 I mean, for the first month that I was in, we did 65 or 62 adjusted. And then, this last month we did 70, almost 80 after adjustment. So it's like the practice is growing, substantially. So even if something, what's $1,000 when you look at that, the grand scheme of things is literally nothing. It's nothing. So spending that money, especially when I'm growing like this, is like, oh, I don't really care. Like, let's just get the ball rolling going. I'm like, I feel like I'm addicted to like spending a new pot. Like, oh, I heard this 3M retraction paste is really good. So I bought that and I'm like, oh man, this is awesome. I like this way better than it's quicker. I've noticed it's quicker. So it's like, how many more things can I buy and try? I'm the owner. I don't have anyone telling me I can't buy this or try this lab. So it's like, let's just buy it all and try it all and see what's making me, how can I get myself to be the fastest as I can be. And I'm, again, 2 months out of school, I'm absolutely nowhere near like the peak of clinical efficiency, but it's like all the more reason to try to pick up as much as you can there because there's so much room for growth for my own self there. So
yeah, I mean, that's the kind of autonomy that you've afforded yourself, right? I mean, even if you're looking back at this at 6 months and you look at some of those decisions, you're like, oh, that didn't really move the needle. But like, who's telling you that, right? Like, it's not a superior that's saying, Kevin, that was dumb. Like, it's you. And you can sit with that decision however you choose. I mean, ultimately, it was a decision that you made, and you learn from it being beneficial or detrimental one way or another. And I think that's just one of the benefits of ownership is it's totally up to you how you want to go about it. And I think you're right in the middle of it. That's awesome.
Yeah, I like every time I'm about to click order, I think whatever lesson this is about to teach me, is there better CE I could have spent this on? And I'm like, I mean, it's kind of a little bit of a joke there because there's probably always something I could be taking, but it's like, okay, I'm going to spend $280 on this new material. Sure. If I spent this on another is there a lesson that I could spend that would be better than this? And it's like, no, like if I use this one time and then never used again, I learned a lesson of that system didn't work for me. And so it's just another thing in my belt that I can add to say, okay, I learned that about myself and now I know. Yeah. And yeah, that's how my supply cost got to 92% of my collections is because no, that's the thing. Is like, I feel like I'm spending a ton. Yeah.
You actually do.
I feel like no.
Oh man, I love
That'd
it.
be hilarious.
You got a whole new
like,
philosophy on here.
Me like trying to give some advice, and then you look at my thing, and it's like, 40% for supplies. You
got to bump those numbers up.
No, so that's the thing. I feel like I was spending so much, and then I'm looking down, and I'm like, just kind of doing like looking, retroactively at the month, and like, okay, we're right in line with where we should be. So it's like, as long as you're growing, it's not really going to matter.
Yeah, the best way to learn is through experience, and I mean that's what you're doing. You're trying to see what works, what doesn't. I mean, if it doesn't, like you just know for the future, like, hey, I need to try something else. So,
right.
I've been listening to the Dentist Money Show since the very beginning, and one of the things that drew me to Dentist Advisor's philosophy of financial advising was this thing called the elements. They have taken your complex financial situation and broken it down into these 12 easy to understand categories that allow you to see where you're at right now, where you want to go, and the steps along the way. When I first learned about the elements, I actually thought, you know what? I'm just going to create a Google Doc of this for myself and track it on my own. However, I am lazy and there's just not enough time, and there's really more to it than I initially understood. Fortunately, Dentist Advisors is now building the Elements app that allows you to get organized, analyze your situation like a pro, and ultimately make smart financial decisions that can be validated by a human financial advisor via chat in the app. I, Richard Lowe, I am a paying beta user of the Elements app, and if you want to be part of this exclusive early beta access group, Dentist Advisors has put together a combination of 3 things. First, they are holding a weekly virtual class to help you learn the fundamentals of personal finance using the Elements app. Next, you get early access to the app at an incredible price available only to early beta users. Finally, like I mentioned before, you'll also have access to advisors via chat within the app to help guide your journey. If you want to be part of this early access beta, go to dentistadvisors.com/shared beta. Once again, to lock this in today, like I've done, go to dentistadvisors.com/shared beta.
Yeah. So to kind of wrap some things up, and you've already, taken upon yourself to give tons of like really valuable advice to students and new dentists out there that are looking to get into ownership. What are some really big overarching takeaways that you have from your journey so far? I mean, I know you're only 2 months into ownership here, but you're someone that went right out of school into practice, and a lot of people, I'd like to say chiefly due to this show, have been considering this, whereas they probably wouldn't have, years ago. So, how does that whole journey resonate with you? Who is it right for? Are there other alternatives they should be, thinking about? A lot of people are kind of coming up at this time and they're like, is this really what I want to do? So what's kind of your takeaway with that?
Yeah, I for sure have shared practices to thank. I mean, I always kind of knew practice ownership was for me, but it wasn't until I started listening to the podcast that it was like, it resonated so at the frequency of me that I was just like, okay, this is it. This is what I want to do. And I'm sure there's so many people out there that are thinking that. I've kind of actually come back a little bit on like, is ownership for everyone? I used to say it's absolutely for everyone. But now I just think it's for most people. I think because I think if you're have the capability to get into and out of dental school, you're probably you've kind of put yourself above maybe the general population. And ownership is not easy, but it's like the fear of what you don't know, I think, is way more paralyzing than it should. People, I think, have this like veil of ignorance of like, oh, well, I don't know, maybe. Again, another thing is like, oh, I got my degree in finance, and like, does that have value to me? Absolutely, but there is absolutely no reason why the excuse of like, oh, well, you got a finance degree, I didn't, so I can't get into ownership as quickly as you did. It's like, that means so little. So the biggest piece I have is just like, whatever you are afraid of with like getting into ownership, I'm not looking back and saying like, oh, anyone could have done this, because it's definitely there were some challenges, but wherever you think you are, you're probably playing a little bit into your fear. If you're the type of person that's like, oh, I really want to get into ownership, and like my dream would be to do that, but I don't think I know enough. It's just like, start moving in that direction. That's one of my biggest things that I could suggest is just let the momentum of your first step kind of carry you into it. For me, I was like, oh, I think I want to buy a practice right out of school. And it was like, well, this all started from back when I was sitting in a radiology lecture, D2 year. Shout out Dr. Ben at Creighton. Not really. He was miserable, but
he listens to this show.
I was sitting in this lecture, and I was like, you know what? This isn't valuable to me. I am going to start seeing what the process of like sending a mailer out would be. And I started my demographics analysis that day. And for me, it's just kind of been that first step has kind of just driven like, oh, wow, like this seems like there's kind of a lot of practices here. And then like, oh, what's the next step? Well, how sending these out would actually be pretty cool. I wonder what kind of response you get. Wow. And just like that curiosity of that momentum of that first step sitting in that class got me here. So if you're thinking, oh, I think ownership might be for me, but I don't really know. Well, doing what you're currently doing, if you're not an owner, is not going to get you to ownership. So make a step in that direction. And even if you don't have a crystal clear vision, like I feel like I do have, I already talked about, like, my vision doesn't mean anything unless I do it, and I haven't at all. So to me, I'm just walking with my head down, nose to the grindstone in that direction, vaguely, generally in that direction. And I suggest that everyone kind of do the same. So whatever you get any sort of idea for where you think you might want to go. You don't even need to know the exact location on Google Maps. You just need to know a direction on a compass. Are you going north, south, east, or west?
Wow.
And once you have that, just start taking your baby steps towards there, because the momentum of like what you will learn along the way will just further guide you and allow you to pinpoint it a little bit more. So don't let the fear of like, oh, I don't know enough. There's nothing you couldn't have. If I had another 2 years to think of what could go wrong, I never would have guessed the problems that were in this practice. I never would have thought that I had to have spent enough time on this. So you just got to do it.
Yeah, no, that is wonderful. I mean, I think that the paradox that dental students deal with is that, up to this point in their lives, knowledge was everything. Like, if you didn't have the knowledge, if there was a gap there, then you're going to fail at something. Like I got to take my part 2 boards in a couple of weeks here. And, mindset's not going to get me through it. Literally, I have to know knowledge.
I believed, and so I achieved.
Yeah. I'm not just going to go in there, just winging it. Like I do interviews and stuff. Like, if I don't know the stuff, I'm going to have to take it again. Right. But, the point that you were making, especially there at the end, is that, even if you don't know, taking that step in the right direction has pivoted you or positioned you to a place where you're actually learning a lot faster than you would if you delayed yourself for lack of knowledge or whatever the case may be. And I think that's a mental transition that people have to make coming out of school and getting out into the real world. It's not what you know, it's who you know and how you react and who you are. That's really moving the needle. And I think that you have so much of that going for you. So I definitely commend you on that. And that I think that's excellent advice.
Another thing is like, I'm going to hammer down on like that. I am not cool or awesome or to be
Agreed.
like looked at. Yeah. Thank you. As someone like, because I did this, some people, I had friends who were like, oh, dude, you brought a practice. That's sick. That's so cool. It's like, once people all start buying practices in my class, then they're all going to be like, that Kevin did was not that impressive. And that's how I feel. It's like, keep yourself humble. What I'm doing right now is not cool. What I'm going to do next month is not going to impress anyone. No one's going to be like, oh my God, he produced $4,500. We did $4,500 on Monday. Like no one in the dental world is going to be thinking that that's cool. But it doesn't matter if they think that is cool, because that's where I'm at and that's where I'm working and that's where I'm working from. So just put your nose to the grindstone. Maybe you're only capable of getting into ownership 2 years from now. That's whatever. That's your own thing. But don't think like, oh, well, that isn't cool that I do that. Like work at your time, work at your own pace, but put your nose down, start taking those steps and don't let your minor achievements, celebrate your minor achievements along the way. Your little goals that you hit, celebrate them and then put them in the past, because getting caught up in like, oh, I bought a practice like that. Like, oh, no, I'm not sure. Like, not at all. Like totally. I feel like it's like, it was almost like I did it. And then I was like, I almost feel like I should have felt more from how much I was looking forward to this. But to me, it's just like, that wasn't the cool thing. This isn't what I'm doing isn't special. It does not require any praise. And the more people actually start believing me, I think the more people will get into ownership earlier, is because Tyler just said it. Anyone who knows me knows this is true. I'm not special. I'm not extra cool or extra smart.
Yeah. That might be the title of the episode. Kevin Reardon.
Go ahead. Yeah, absolutely. You know what? The people don't put that as a title, because then everyone who listens to it, Kevin Reardon's not cool. Is like, all right, I already know everything about that episode.
Duh. Dude, it doesn't matter if anyone else thinks you're cool, as long as you think you're cool. That's all that matters.
He doesn't think he's cool. No one thinks he's cool.
Yeah. No one does. My family doesn't like me. No one loves me. It's whatever.
Yeah. Well, we're not going to get into that, Kevin. That's
too deep.
Episode.
Well, people don't think I'm cool or likable because I'm not. That's
okay.
It. I mean,
all right.
that's the only reason. It's because I'm just totally not at all a likable person.
Well, fair enough.
I think you're cool, Kevin, for the record.
And Peyton's just wrong.
Whatever.
Yeah, I mean, one thing about it, and I like everything that you're saying. The only caveat I would present to you is that you do have a very cool vision, right? Like that is objectively cool. Like your 30-out practice, the families treating families, everything that you have about that is definitely cool. But where I challenge you is that, when you get there, or when you approach this, mega vision that you have, and I'm sure things will, have nuance changes over time as you learn more and modify that vision. Is there going to be a time where you have that, like there's going to be a point where you're making X amount of money, or like everything's churning along, you get your whole family in the practice and it's doing well, where you're going to say, okay, now I'm cool? Or is it always going to be, Kevin's not cool, Kevin has another thing that he has to do before he's cool?
I don't know, because I'm not anyone who knows me also knows that I'm also not one to get down on myself or like wallow in self-pity or be pessimistic. So it's like, I'm giving this advice to someone who has, if you already are doubting yourself a million times and never take time to celebrate the wins in life, then that advice was not for you. But I think if you listen to this episode, you're probably a little bit more of a go-getter and probably need to hear more of that advice. So, I mean, I picked, that goal for me, to me right now seems unattainable. And the minute that it seems attainable, then I'm going to adjust the bar even higher and just something that's just out of my reach. So, will I ever get there? I don't know, because I've loved the process along the way, and I've absolutely loved seeing my team just in these 2 months grow, and how I've grown clinically and my speed up and getting the rapport with the patients. Like, no, I absolutely don't want to make it seem like you should ever be super hard and say like, oh, nothing that I've accomplished is worth anything.
Right.
I'm just saying, like, it doesn't, it is what it is. What y'all got trophies for playing baseball in kindergarten and second grade. And even if they were first place trophies, like, what do they mean then? Nothing to your current self. So,
I might have to push back on that. I still brag about my,
my baseball second trophy. Place, Little League.
Oh yeah. Oh, big time.
Green Sox. I was big on second place as a kid. Like, I have so many second place medals. It's crazy.
That's impressive.
Yeah, no, again with the tangents, but no, I'm glad you clarified that, because the truth of the matter is, like, I understand that you're sort of contextualizing what you've done in buying a practice out of school and saying, ultimately, like, other dentists my age, like, they're going to be owning practices and they're not going to think this is as cool after they've done it. But you are going to get added to a list of those ambitious dental students that bought right out of school and found success, and people are going to think that's cool. And, I think we've done enough to caution them against thinking you're cool. But I think that, you still do have to pat yourself on the back occasionally and look at yourself and say, you know what, I did do this. And I have a ton of respect for you for following through with ownership, especially during this time, and just going into it and flourishing in it, especially in doing it in your own way, in an authentic way that has fulfillment for you. I just personally like to commend you on that for sure.
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's impossible to give advice like that to the masses. Mindset advice. Like, I don't know thyself. Like, where's your mind at? If you're someone, you just, and that's the biggest thing, is just know yourself and know what you need to tell yourself, and know your own mind, and identifying your own, like, trigger points of what gets you in the bad and what kind of will help you out. And for me, it's just that reminder to eat my humble pie every day. So
yeah, for sure. Peyton, you got anything?
Yeah, I think it sounds great. It's very refreshing to hear that you're so fresh out of school, you have your vision so clearly formed, and you don't feel pressure to conform to someone's way of doing things. You're doing it your way, and you're completely cool with that. And I have a lot of respect for you in that regard.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, man, for sure. This has been a really fantastic 6-month follow-up, and I can't wait to see where you're at in the next 6 months.
Yeah, who knows?
Yeah,
probably in jail. I don't know.
Hey, that would also be a really cool episode if you would use your one phone call for.
Let's do it. Yeah, let's do it
via Squadcast. That would be fantastic. So I'm definitely looking forward to the jailhouse call in
Sounds good.
All right.
I said it on air, so it's a contract.
All right, Dr. Reardon, we really appreciate you, and I'm sure the audience will love this one, and they'll be looking forward to that jailhouse call.
Yeah.
All right, man. See ya.
Thanks for having me. Take care, guys.
All right. This is TPO with Peyton and Tyler, recording with Kevin Reardon for part 2, and this is the outro. All right, guys. So that wraps up our 2-part series with Kevin Reardon. I really hope you guys enjoyed it. This guy, man, as you can tell, he is just, I was telling Peyton before the interview, because, he'd never spoken to him before. That's right. You'd never spoken to him.
Yeah, correct.
you give this guy an inch, he takes it a mile, and he does it so well. As an interviewer, it's so fun to just be able to ask, basic questions and have someone just like really take off with them and go into places that you hope they're going to go, and you're thinking about how you're going to prompt it, but then they just kind of do it themselves. And that's what he's so great for. And he had so many mindset nuggets. And one thing that he capitulated, and I felt very similarly, at least within the context of the percent of ownership, is that after you listen to so many podcasts about how to do dentistry and how to do the dental business, after a while, like when you're really talking about tactical stuff, things kind of start to sound pretty similar. Like, sure, there might be a little tidbit of information you didn't know before, or something seems a little bit more clear than it used to be, but you start taking a lot less notes when you listen. Like when I first started listening, I furiously took notes. Like it would take me 2 hours to listen to a podcast episode that was 45 minutes because I'm just having to pause and write things down, right? But after a while, you start getting this sort of didactic knowledge down. And what becomes a lot more engaging and valuable for you is the mindset and the leadership and what it's really like to be on the ground, so to speak, with these things. And the more testament we get from, young, ambitious dental students that are going out here and, actually buying practices and going through this process, the better. And, hearing about, who they are and how it's been for them and addressing some of these fears and the mindset blocks that are out there. I just think that's super valuable. And one thing that Kevin mentioned as we were closing is like, we didn't even really get into numbers, and I was like, yeah, we kind of didn't. I guess we could have, but honestly, I think this audience at this point, like, we can get in numbers if we want to. If we get a request for that, I'm sure Kevin would be glad to come back on. But like, is there really as much value coming from that? At this point, like I think a lot of it, a lot of the value just comes from listening to a very recently former dental student talk about his journey, and he did it so well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think too, with the mindset stuff, like, leadership books and that kind of thing, is not just reading the books, but looking at it with like in the context of, how does this matter in my life? How am I going to implement this in my dental practice? Like, you can look at it through the lens of how your life is going to be. And I feel like that's where the true breakthroughs will come from. With numbers, I mean, we've seen a lot of numbers on the show, and they're helpful to an extent, but at the end of the day, there's so many things that are intangible, and so many things like, working with a team, interacting with patients, all those things that numbers aren't going to get you. And I think it's just very, very important. And it's kind of cool that he brought up how much, mindset and leadership really are in his practice journey.
Yeah, I think a lot of times when we talk about numbers, people do these sort of like head calculations of like what people are taking home every month. And, what you're doing with that is like, you're not really looking at it as a number. You're ending up like thinking about yourself in the future, perhaps making that amount of money, and like how your life is going to be different and how it's going to be. And so you're trying to imagine for yourself, like how things would be if you made X amount of money in whatever opportunity. And I think that puts a little bit too much imagination and focus into something that you really aren't sure of. And time again, we see these people that are, cash flowing and doing really well, and they're in these situations, and they're not talking about the money they're making. Really, they're talking about the challenges that they're facing every day, the things that they didn't anticipate, or the things that they weren't as well equipped with as they expected to be, or things they wish they'd known about before they got into these opportunities. And I think that focusing on that is really a lot more valuable to the audience. And I find it personally a lot more valuable too.
Yeah. And another thing too that he did bring up is he said like he felt like what he had done is like not super cool. It's not like super impressive, which I was definitely going to like heavily disagree with in the episode. But he also made it a point to say that he enjoys the process. He enjoys the journey. It's not like he feels like he's waiting until someday where all of his problems are going to go away and his practice is going to be where he wants it. I thought it was very important that he acknowledged that, because it almost made it sound like he like wasn't really appreciating the milestones that he was hitting. Early practice ownership. Yeah. But when he kind of reframed it a little bit and said like he's enjoying the process, he's looking forward to, reaching his next milestones and all that stuff, that made it definitely a little bit more admirable and reframed it for me.
Yeah, I was hoping he would pat himself on the back a little bit more, just because I do think that what he's done is pretty cool, and I do admire it. It's kind of a balance that we play with, because a lot of people like him, like myself, I think, will kind of look at the things that they've accomplished and really undervalue them. Really all the way up until now, I've considered almost everything that I've done to be pretty small. Like I didn't really celebrate graduating high school. I didn't celebrate graduating college, really. I didn't really consider those things accomplishments because I was like, I'm not really where I want to be. And I've very recently gotten better about celebrating those little milestones and like having those little things that I celebrate along the way. And that's been something I've really had to work on. But I think Kevin's found a more stable position where, he is proud of himself, but he like doesn't consider it cool because like he's trying to stay hungry. He's trying to stay ambitious, and I still have respect for that. But it's just it's a funny line that we tread between self appreciation and self deprecation, right? And I think that maybe there's some fear associated with, well, if I acknowledge myself too much, then I'm not going to keep striving for this thing I want, and that's something we have to play with all the time, and that's something we have to kind of be held accountable to, I think.
Yeah, I definitely feel like interacting with Matt on a regular basis really helps with celebrating life events.
I don't know if he's the angel or the demon on my shoulder. I really don't. But you're absolutely right, man. Like anytime you say something, and I know I'm interjecting, but like he does this to me all the time. Like anytime I say that I did something that's like decent or whatever, or something I was trying to do, it's like, okay, how are you going to celebrate? Like, what are you going to do about it? You know what I mean? And like you have to, or you're going to get grievance over it.
Yeah, I honestly, I love it because Matt, I feel like Matt's personality, like it's kind of calm. It's like cool and collected. Like you wouldn't expect him to be the guy like, all right, hey, how are we going to celebrate? But he is. And it's awesome. So
yeah.
I know, I feel like Kevin probably celebrates it internally a little bit, but maybe he could benefit for some more external celebration too.
I don't know. Maybe he could be coached on that. I don't know. But that's for other people to decide. But either way, I think he's great. I think he's going to be a lot of dental students hero for what he's done, just because like he has had the boldness to do it authentically and doing it in his own way. I do have to say, if I'm being a bit bold, that there will be a point sooner than he anticipates where external growth is going to become important. I think that there is a lot of reliance on the current population that is there. And I should have gotten into this a little bit more with him, but we kind of started talking about mindset stuff. I was like, oh, that's fine. I think that, he's going to be able to ride this for a while, but he's kind of like, he's in the honeymoon phase, and he probably is aware of that to some degree. It's where, you have this undiagnosed population, and you're seeing these patients that already exist, and like there's all this stuff that you can do. But eventually that is going to dry up, and those patients are going to keep coming back, and they're already restored. And you're like, okay, well, now what do I do? Like, I got to put stuff back on my plate, right? Like when you're treating things, that's taking stuff off of your plate, and you need to be more worried about like, how am I going to get new things to do? For the time being, I mean, it does sound like a lot of things were drastically underdiagnosed. So I know he's got a lot of work ahead of him, and that's mentally probably a whole lot to handle, especially for, a dentist right out of school. So, but we'll see. That's kind of like, I want to see how that pans out. I want to see how it works out for him. And that's why, among other things, I want to see him for the 6-month follow-up, another 6-month follow-up from jail.
Yeah, absolutely. From jail. That's the key part. That's kind of why too. I was picking a little bit deeper when I asked him. I was like, hey, do you think you have enough patients to completely max out the 4-op practice?
Right.
Because with his vision, I feel like external marketing almost needs to be a given. That's going to get him closer to where he needs to go.
But it's an interesting play though, because he's not necessarily planning on growing this practice into a 30-op practice. He's going to be acquiring other practices, or building another practice, or working on other acquisitions and having satellite practices or whatever. So like the growth is still there. There is sort of an external growth, but it's like he's taking it in leaps and bounds instead of just sort of like an incremental rise in the practice that he bought. That's kind of how I see it, because he's going to be kind of moving through different phases of, trying to be the FFS, productive solo provider, which is pretty much what he's like going towards, trying to get to like 1.2, and then he's going to kind of reach a plateau there. And then he's going to, maybe look for a larger group practice where he moves the office, or maybe he can expand it. We didn't even get into real estate. That's one thing we definitely should have gotten into. Or, he's going to build another practice, or, whatever the case may be. So maybe this honeymoon phase, like he's able to kind of prolong it and extend it and like do enough with it for the time being. And then he has another acquisition or merger opportunity or what have you down the road. And he's going to be navigating that for sure. So it'll be really interesting to see how that pans out. And, we'll, now that he's got open dental and everything, we'll be able to track it too. If he'd be willing to do that, I'm sure. I love his journey, and he always brings so much to the table when he comes on. So it's gonna be really interesting to see how it pans out over time.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm just curious to see if he can find that many fee-for-service practices to acquire,
Right. It'll be interesting. It'll definitely be interesting. Okay, guys. This has been a long enough outro, I think, but I really appreciate you all hanging on for this two-parter. I hope you found the same amount of value in it as I did. And, we certainly hope to be doing some more follow-up episodes with, people that got into ownership and, seeing how it treated them.